high among the branches of forests that stretch across Europe and deep into Asia. A small, restless presence moves with quiet precision. The Eurasian red squirrel lives in a world defined by wood and light, where every path is shaped by branches and every season brings a new set of challenges. It is an animal of motion and memory, gathering, storing, and navigating a landscape that is constantly changing. Its life unfolds in rhythm with the forest, tied to the cycles of growth, scarcity, and renewal that govern the living world around it. Part 1. Origins. The lineage of the Eurasian red squirrel stretches deep into the ancient past, rooted in a time when the earliest rodents began to diversify among the forests of the Northern Hemisphere. Its ancestors belonged to a broader group of early tree-dwelling mammals that developed sharp incisors, flexible limbs, and an instinctive relationship with vertical space. Over countless generations, these early forms refined their ability to climb, leap, and navigate complex arboreal environments, gradually giving rise to the lineage known today as Squirrus vulgaris. The name itself, derived from ancient language meaning shadow tail, reflects a defining feature: a long, expressive tail that arches over the body, casting a shifting silhouette as the animal pauses in filtered light. This tail is not merely ornamental. It serves as a balancing rudder during leaps, a signaling device in communication, and a thermal shield in winter, when it is wrapped around the body like a living blanket. Despite their similar appearance and shared name, the Eurasian red squirrel is not closely related to the small red squirrels of North America. The American red squirrel belongs to a different lineage, one that diverged earlier in the evolutionary history of tree squirrels and developed its own distinct behaviors and physical traits. The resemblance between them is the result of convergent adaptation to similar forest environments, rather than close kinship. In contrast, the Eurasian red squirrel shares a more recent common ancestry with other members of the same genus found across Asia, including the Japanese squirrel and populations in the Caucasus region. These relatives retain many of the same structural features, such as body proportions, tail morphology, and seasonal coat variation, reflecting a shared evolutionary path shaped within the forests of Eurasia. Fossil evidence suggests that early members of the squirrel family spread across Eurasia during periods when forests expanded and contracted with changing climates. As ice advanced and retreated, populations became isolated and then reconnected, shaping the genetic diversity seen today. The Eurasian red squirrel emerged as a highly adaptable form, capable of surviving in a wide range of forest types, from dense conifer stands to mixed woodlands and even urban parks. Its evolutionary success lies not in brute strength or speed alone, but in a finely tuned balance of memory, dexterity, and ecological awareness. Across Europe and into the vast forests of Siberia, the squirrel's form subtly shifts in response to local conditions. In colder regions, individuals often develop darker, thicker coats, sometimes appearing almost black against the snow. In milder climates, their fur may glow with a brighter reddish hue, blending with bark and autumn leaves. This variability is not random, but a reflection of selective pressures that favor camouflage, insulation, and seasonal adaptation. The growth of ear tufts in winter, long and brush-like, is another example of this seasonal transformation. These tufts may play a role in communication or protection, but they also serve as a visual marker of the species' changing physiology as it prepares for harsher conditions. The skeletal structure of the Eurasian red squirrel reveals its arboreal specialization. The hind limbs are powerful, built for explosive leaps that can carry the animal across gaps of several meters between branches. The ankles possess a remarkable flexibility, allowing rotation that enables the squirrel to descend headfirst down tree trunks. This ability is critical in avoiding predators and navigating vertical surfaces quickly. The claws are sharp and curved, gripping bark with precision, while the whiskers provide constant sensory feedback about nearby surfaces and obstacles. Within this evolutionary framework, the squirrel has developed behaviors that reflect both ancient instincts and refined strategies. Its tendency to scatter hoard food, burying seeds and nuts across a wide territory, is a behavior that likely originated as a response to unpredictable resource availability. Over time, this strategy not only ensured survival, but also shaped entire forest ecosystems as forgotten seeds germinated into new growth. The squirrel, in this sense, is both a consumer and a silent cultivator of the forest. Its brain, though small, is highly specialized for spatial memory. It can recall the locations of numerous hidden caches, even when concealed beneath layers of snow. Yet this memory is not perfect, and it does not need to be. The balance between remembering and forgetting is part of a larger ecological process, one that has linked the fate of the squirrel to the regeneration of the forests it inhabits. This relationship, forged over thousands of years, underscores the deep connection between the species and its environment. The Eurasian red squirrel stands as a product of evolutionary refinement, shaped by climate, competition, and the structure of the forests themselves. Its presence in modern landscapes is a continuation of an ancient story, one that began long before human observation and continues to unfold with each passing season. Part 2. Habitats. The Eurasian red squirrel inhabits a world defined by trees, where the structure of the forest itself shapes every movement, decision, and opportunity for survival. Across its immense range, it is most closely associated with coniferous forests, where pine, spruce, and fir dominate the landscape. These trees provide not only shelter, but a dependable, though fluctuating source of food, in the form of seeds hidden within cones. The architecture of such forests, with their layered canopy and interlocking branches, creates a three-dimensional environment in which the squirrel moves with remarkable precision. Here, the ground becomes almost secondary, a place of brief transitions rather than prolonged activity, as the animal relies on elevated pathways that reduce exposure to predators. Within these conifer-dominated habitats, the squirrel's life is closely tied to the cycles of cone production. Some years bring abundance, with branches heavy under the weight of ripening cones, while others yield scarcity, forcing individuals to range farther in search of sustenance. These fluctuations are not random, but part of long-term ecological rhythms that influence population density, breeding success, and territorial behavior. In years of plenty, squirrels may remain within relatively small home ranges, their needs easily met within familiar surroundings. When resources decline, however, they may expand their movements significantly, sometimes dispersing across large areas in search of more productive stands of trees. Although conifer forests represent the core of its ecological niche, the Eurasian red squirrel is far from restricted to a single habitat type. It is equally capable of occupying mixed woodlands, where deciduous species such as oak, beech, and hazel contribute additional food sources. In these environments, the diversity of available seeds, nuts, and plant materials can buffer the effects of poor cone years, allowing more stable populations to persist. The squirrel adjusts its foraging strategies accordingly, shifting from cone stripping to gathering acorns or hazelnuts, demonstrating a flexible approach that reflects both instinct and learned behavior. In northern and mountainous regions, where winters are long and conditions harsh, the forest takes on a different character. Snow may blanket the ground for extended periods, and temperatures can drop well below freezing. Under such conditions, the squirrel's survival depends on careful preparation and efficient use of stored resources. Food caches, hidden beneath leaf litter or shallow soil, become essential reserves. Even when covered by snow, these caches can be located through scent, allowing the animal to access nourishment when fresh food is unavailable. Activity may be reduced during the coldest periods, with individuals remaining within their nests for extended intervals, conserving energy until conditions improve. The vertical complexity of the forest is central to the squirrel's way of life. It navigates not just from tree to tree, but within the intricate network of branches, trunks, and foliage that form its primary domain. Regular routes develop over time, forming what might be described as aerial pathways through the canopy. These routes are not random, but reflect repeated use, linking feeding sites, resting places, and nests in an efficient network that minimizes risk. Movement along these paths is fluid and controlled, with powerful hind limbs providing the force for leaps that can span several meters, while the tail acts as a stabilizing counterbalance mid-air. Nesting sites are chosen with equal care. The squirrel constructs drays, spherical nests made of twigs, leaves, and moss, typically positioned high in the branches where access is limited for ground-based predators. These structures are insulated and reinforced over time, sometimes reused and repaired across seasons. In some cases, natural cavities within trees offer an alternative, providing greater protection from wind and cold. The choice between these options depends on availability and environmental conditions, reflecting a capacity to adapt nesting behavior to local circumstances. The sensory world of the Eurasian red squirrel is finely attuned to the forest environment. Vision plays a crucial role in navigating complex spaces and detecting movement, while hearing allows the animal to remain aware of distant disturbances. Scent, however, is particularly important in locating hidden food and recognizing territorial boundaries. Chemical cues left by other squirrels convey information about presence and activity, shaping interactions even in the absence of direct encounters. This layered perception of the environment allows the squirrel to operate effectively within a habitat that is both dense and dynamic. Seasonal change brings continual transformation to the forest, and the squirrel responds with corresponding adjustments in behavior and physiology. As autumn approaches, activity intensifies, with individuals gathering and storing food in preparation for winter. The coat becomes thicker, and in many individuals, ear tufts grow more pronounced, signaling the onset of colder conditions. In spring, as temperatures rise and new growth appears, the forest offers renewed abundance, and the squirrel shifts its focus toward feeding on fresh plant material and preparing for reproduction. Even within human-altered landscapes, the Eurasian red squirrel demonstrates a capacity for persistence. Parks, gardens, and fragmented woodlands can support populations where suitable trees remain. In such environments, the boundaries between natural and artificial habitats blur, yet the essential requirements remain the same: access to food, safe nesting sites, and a connected canopy. Where these elements are present, the squirrel continues to occupy its ecological role, moving through branches that may now overlook pathways, roads, or human dwellings. In all these settings, the defining feature of the Eurasian red squirrel's habitat is not a specific type of forest, but the presence of structure, continuity, and resources that support an arboreal life. It is an animal shaped by trees, dependent on their cycles, and integrated into the living fabric of the woodland. The forest is not merely a backdrop, but a complex system within which the squirrel exists as both participant and contributor, its daily actions woven into the broader processes that sustain the ecosystem. Part 3. Predators. Within the forest canopy and along the edges where branches meet open air, the Eurasian red squirrel exists in a landscape shaped not only by opportunity, but by constant risk. Predators are an ever-present force, influencing movement, feeding behavior, and even the placement of nests. Survival depends on awareness, speed, and the ability to interpret subtle signals within the environment. Each sound, shadow, or shift in the canopy may carry meaning, and the squirrel's responses are shaped by generations of selection favoring those able to detect danger early and react without hesitation. Among the most significant threats are birds of prey, whose vantage point above the forest allows them to scan large areas with precision. Species such as the northern goshawk move through the woodland with controlled power, capable of weaving between trees in pursuit of agile prey. From above, the squirrel is exposed when crossing gaps or moving along outer branches, and its bright or contrasting coloration can, in certain conditions, make it more visible. Yet the same complexity of the forest that creates these risks also offers protection. Dense foliage, twisting branches, and irregular terrain disrupt the flight paths of larger predators, creating moments of opportunity in which the squirrel can evade capture. On the ground and along tree trunks, a different set of predators exerts pressure. The pine marten, a lithe and highly capable climber, is among the most effective hunters of squirrels within European forests. Unlike aerial predators, it can pursue its target along the same routes, matching agility with agility. Encounters between the two unfold within the three-dimensional maze of branches, where speed alone is not always enough. The squirrel relies on its intimate knowledge of escape routes, using sudden changes in direction, rapid descents, and leaps across gaps that may be just beyond the reach of its pursuer. The ability to rotate its ankles and descend, headfirst down a trunk, becomes especially valuable in these moments, allowing it to shift direction quickly and exploit vertical space in ways that disrupt the predator's pursuit. Beyond the agile hunters of the canopy, a wider array of mammals poses a quieter, more opportunistic threat. Foxes, wildcats, and smaller mustelids take squirrels when chance allows, most often during moments spent on the ground or near the base of trees. These encounters are less frequent, yet no less significant, reminding that danger exists not only above and within the branches, but also below them. Among these predators, the domestic cat stands apart, not for its size or specialization, but for its close association with human environments. In gardens, parks, and fragmented woodlands, it introduces a constant and often underestimated pressure. Unlike wild predators, which are limited by territory and natural population balance, domestic cats may hunt frequently and without immediate necessity. Juvenile squirrels, in particular, are vulnerable during their early movements beyond the nest, and encounters in low vegetation or near tree bases can prove decisive. In such spaces, where the boundary between forest and human habitation fades, the presence of the cat becomes a quiet but persistent influence on survival. Owls represent another form of danger, particularly during periods of low light. Although the Eurasian red squirrel is primarily active during the day, its resting sites and nests remain vulnerable. A well-hidden dray, constructed high among branches and reinforced with insulating materials, offers a degree of protection, but it is not entirely secure. The placement of such nests reflects a balance between concealment and accessibility, reducing the likelihood of detection while maintaining proximity to feeding areas and established routes. The presence of predators shapes behavior even in their absence. When foraging, the squirrel frequently pauses, lifting its head and scanning its surroundings. These brief moments of stillness are not signs of hesitation, but of constant evaluation, a process through which the animal assesses risk before continuing. At times, rather than fleeing immediately, it may freeze in place, relying on camouflage and the irregular patterns of bark and shadow to remain undetected. This strategy can be particularly effective when a predator's attention is drawn by movement, allowing the squirrel to remain hidden in plain sight. Alarm signals play a crucial role in this defensive system. Vocalizations, ranging from sharp calls to rapid chattering, can alert nearby individuals to the presence of danger. The nature of these calls may vary depending on the type of threat, with different patterns associated with aerial or terrestrial predators. In addition to sound, visual signals such as tail flicking convey urgency and intent, providing a layered communication system that operates across distances where direct contact is not possible. Juveniles, lacking the experience of adults, face heightened risk during their early explorations beyond the nest. As they learn to navigate the canopy, they must also learn to interpret the signs of danger that surround them. Many do not survive this vulnerable stage, and predation plays a significant role in shaping population dynamics. Those that do persist carry forward the learned behaviors that will guide them throughout their lives. The relationship between predator and prey is not solely one of pursuit and escape, but of continuous adaptation. In some regions, the presence of certain predators has indirect effects on the broader ecosystem. The pine marten, for example, has been observed to suppress populations of invasive grey squirrels, which compete with the Eurasian red squirrel for resources. In such cases, the predator becomes part of a complex balance, influencing not only individual survival, but the composition of the community as a whole. Despite these pressures, the Eurasian red squirrel remains a resilient species. Its survival strategies refined through countless encounters with danger. Its agility, awareness, and capacity to exploit the structure of the forest allow it to persist in an environment where threats are constant and often unpredictable. The presence of predators is not merely a challenge to overcome, but a defining element of the squirrel's existence, shaping its behavior and maintaining the dynamic equilibrium of the forest ecosystem. Part 4. Food. The Eurasian red squirrel sustains itself through a diet that reflects both specialization and flexibility, shaped by the changing availability of resources within the forest. At the core of its feeding ecology lies a close dependence on the seeds of conifer trees, particularly those of pine, spruce, and fir. These seeds, enclosed within tightly structured cones, require both strength and precision to access. The squirrel approaches this task with remarkable efficiency, holding the cone in its forepaws while rotating it in a controlled manner, stripping away scales in rapid succession to extract the nutrient-rich kernels beneath. The remains of this process, often scattered beneath feeding sites, form characteristic piles that mark the presence of the species within a given area. The reliance on conifer seeds ties the squirrel's fortunes to the cyclical patterns of forest productivity. In years when cone production is high, food becomes abundant, allowing individuals to build reserves and maintain stable territories. During such periods, feeding activity may be concentrated within relatively small areas, as the need to travel long distances diminishes. In contrast, years of poor cone yield introduce scarcity, prompting a broader search for alternative resources and increasing competition among individuals. These fluctuations influence not only daily behavior, but also longer-term processes, such as reproduction and survival. Beyond its primary reliance on seeds, the Eurasian red squirrel exhibits a diverse and opportunistic diet. Deciduous forests provide acorns, hazelnuts, and other hard mast, which are gathered and consumed when available. The squirrel's incisors, continuously growing and kept sharp through constant use, allow it to breach the hard shells of these foods with ease. This dietary flexibility enables the species to persist in mixed woodlands, where reliance on a single food source would be insufficient. Seasonal variation further expands the menu, with buds, shoots, and bark consumed during periods when other resources are limited. Fungi form a significant, though often overlooked, component of the squirrel's diet. Various species of mushrooms are collected and eaten, some of which are toxic to many other animals but tolerated by the squirrel. In a behavior that reflects both instinct and adaptation, individuals have been observed placing mushrooms on branches to dry before consumption. This practice may serve to preserve the food or alter its chemical composition, allowing it to be stored and consumed over a longer period. Through the consumption and subsequent dispersal of fungal spores, the squirrel contributes to the maintenance of underground networks that connect trees and facilitate nutrient exchange within the forest. Animal matter is also incorporated into the diet, particularly during times of increased nutritional demand. Insects, larvae, and occasionally bird eggs or nestlings may be taken when encountered. These sources provide protein that complements a predominantly plant-based diet, especially during the breeding season when energy requirements are elevated. Such behavior, while less visible than seed foraging, reflects the opportunistic nature of the species and its ability to exploit a wide range of resources. Central to the feeding strategy of the Eurasian red squirrel is the practice of scatter hoarding. Rather than storing food in a single location, the squirrel distributes its caches across numerous sites within its territory. Seeds and nuts are buried beneath soil, leaf litter, or moss, often at shallow depths that allow for later retrieval. This approach reduces the risk of total loss to pilfering by other animals, ensuring that at least some stores remain available during periods of scarcity. The placement of these caches is not random. The squirrel selects locations that are both accessible and discreet, often near landmarks that aid in memory and retrieval. The ability to locate stored food relies heavily on a well-developed sense of smell, particularly when caches are concealed beneath snow. Even in winter, when visual cues are obscured, the squirrel can detect buried resources and recover them with surprising accuracy. Memory plays a complementary role, allowing individuals to recall the general locations of numerous caches. However, this system is not flawless. Some stored items are never retrieved, either forgotten or abandoned, and it is through this imperfection that the squirrel inadvertently shapes the forest, as uneaten seeds germinate and contribute to regeneration. Competition for food introduces an additional layer of complexity. Other squirrels, as well as birds and small mammals, may attempt to locate and exploit hidden caches. In response, the Eurasian red squirrel employs behaviors that suggest a degree of strategic awareness. When observed by potential competitors, It may engage in deceptive actions, mimicking the act of burying food without actually leaving anything behind. This behavior reduces the likelihood that a real cache will be discovered and stolen, illustrating a level of behavioral sophistication that extends beyond simple instinct. Feeding activity is structured around daily and seasonal rhythms. The squirrel is primarily active during daylight hours, with peaks in the morning and late afternoon. During these periods, it moves along established routes, visiting known feeding sites and checking caches. As autumn approaches, activity intensifies, driven by the need to accumulate sufficient reserves for the winter months. This period of abundance and preparation stands in contrast to the relative austerity of winter, when feeding becomes more dependent on stored resources and opportunistic finds. Water intake is largely derived from food, reducing the need for frequent visits to open water sources. Moisture contained within seeds, fungi, and plant material provides sufficient hydration under most conditions. This adaptation allows the squirrel to remain within the canopy for extended periods, minimizing exposure to ground-based predators. The feeding ecology of the Eurasian red squirrel is thus a dynamic system shaped by environmental variability, competition, and the demands of survival. It reflects a balance between specialization and adaptability, enabling the species to navigate the uncertainties of its habitat. Through its interactions with seeds, fungi, and other organisms, the squirrel participates in a broader network of ecological relationships, its daily search for food intertwined with the processes that sustain the forest itself. Part 5. Family life. The cycle of life for the Eurasian red squirrel unfolds in close alignment with the rhythms of the forest, shaped by the availability of food, the timing of seasons, and the demands of survival in a dynamic environment. Reproduction is not fixed to a single period, but varies according to local conditions, with the potential for more than one breeding cycle within a year when resources are abundant. In years of scarcity, however, reproduction may be reduced or even skipped entirely, reflecting a strategy that prioritizes survival over the risks of raising young in unfavorable conditions. The breeding season is marked by a noticeable shift in behavior, particularly among males, who expand their movements in search of receptive females. This period introduces a temporary overlap of territories that are otherwise maintained with relative exclusivity. Chasing behavior becomes more frequent, with several males often pursuing a single female through the canopy in rapid, looping movements that test agility and endurance. These pursuits are not random displays, but part of a competitive process through which mating opportunities are determined. Following successful mating, the male takes no further role in the development of the offspring. The responsibility for gestation and care rests entirely with the female, whose behavior becomes increasingly focused on the preparation and maintenance of a secure nesting site. Gestation lasts for a little over a month, after which a litter is born within the sheltered interior of a dray, or, in some cases, a tree cavity. The number of young can vary, but typically consists of a small group that reflects a balance between reproductive potential and the mother's capacity to provide care. At birth, the young are in a highly undeveloped state. They are blind, without fur, and entirely dependent on the warmth and protection of the nest. The early weeks of life are spent in near constant contact with the mother, who provides nourishment and maintains the structure of the nest. During this period, the choice of nesting site proves critical, as it must offer both insulation from environmental conditions and concealment from predators. The dray, constructed from interwoven twigs and lined with softer materials such as moss and leaves, forms a protective sphere that moderates temperature and shields its occupants from wind and precipitation. As the young develop, gradual changes mark their transition toward independence. Fur begins to grow, eyes open, and mobility increases within the confines of the nest. The mother adjusts her behavior accordingly, leaving the nest more frequently to forage while still returning regularly to feed and monitor her offspring. This balance between absence and care reflects the competing demands of providing for the young while maintaining her own condition. The period of emergence from the nest represents a critical stage in the lives of juvenile squirrels. Venturing onto branches for the first time, they encounter a world that requires coordination, balance, and rapid learning. Early movements are cautious and limited in scope, often confined to areas close to the nest. Over time, confidence increases, and the young begin to explore more widely, developing the skills necessary for independent survival. This stage is also one of heightened vulnerability, as inexperience and smaller size make juveniles more susceptible to predation. Weaning marks another transition, as the young shift from dependence on maternal milk to a diet of solid foods. The mother may guide this process by bringing food to the nest or consuming items in the presence of the young, providing an opportunity for observational learning. Gradually, the juveniles begin to forage on their own, practicing the techniques that will sustain them throughout their lives. The ability to handle cones, extract seeds, and locate suitable food sources develops through repetition and trial. Dispersal follows as the final step toward independence. Young squirrels leave the maternal territory and seek out areas of their own, a process that can involve considerable movement through unfamiliar terrain. The success of this transition depends on the availability of suitable habitat and the ability of the individual to establish a territory that provides sufficient resources. Not all individuals succeed, and mortality during this phase contributes to the overall dynamics of the population. The possibility of a second breeding cycle within the same year introduces additional complexity. When conditions allow, a female may raise another litter, repeating the cycle of gestation, birth, and care. This capacity for multiple reproductive events enhances the potential for population growth during favorable periods, yet it remains closely tied to environmental constraints. The decision to reproduce again is influenced by the mother's condition, the availability of food, and the progression of the season. Throughout this process, the relationship between mother and offspring is defined by a balance of investment and eventual separation. The early intensity of care gives way to independence, as the young transition from protected occupants of the nest to active participants in the forest environment. The life cycle of the Eurasian red squirrel, though brief for many individuals, is marked by stages that reflect both vulnerability and resilience, each shaped by the conditions of the surrounding habitat and the enduring demands of survival. Part 6. Social bonds. Life within the forest canopy is not a solitary silence, but a network of subtle interactions that unfold between individuals sharing overlapping spaces. The Eurasian red squirrel, though often described as solitary, exists within a social framework defined by territories, recognition, and momentary tolerances that shift with season and circumstance. Each individual occupies a home range that is defended primarily through signals, rather than constant confrontation, creating a mosaic of adjacent domains that together form the living structure of the population. Territories are not rigidly bounded in the way of fixed borders, but are instead zones of frequent use, marked by scent and reinforced through repeated presence. Chemical cues left along branches, feeding sites, and resting areas convey information about identity and occupancy. These signals allow neighboring squirrels to recognize one another without direct contact, reducing the need for constant physical encounters. Over time, individuals become familiar with their immediate neighbors, responding differently to known individuals than to strangers. A neighboring squirrel that respects boundaries may be tolerated at the edges of a territory, while an unfamiliar intruder is more likely to provoke a defensive response. Encounters between individuals are often brief but expressive. When two squirrels approach the same space, body posture, tail movement, and vocalizations combine to communicate intent. The tail, held high and flicked in sharp motions, becomes a visual signal that can escalate or diffuse tension depending on context. Vocal sounds, ranging from low growls to rapid chattering, add an auditory layer to these exchanges. In many cases, such signals are sufficient to resolve the interaction, with one individual retreating before physical conflict occurs. This reliance on communication over confrontation reduces the risk of injury, which in a wild environment can carry serious consequences. The structure of these relationships shifts during the breeding season, when the normally stable pattern of territories becomes more fluid. Males expand their movements, entering the ranges of multiple females and encountering one another more frequently. This leads to increased interaction, including chases that involve several individuals moving rapidly through the canopy. These pursuits are not merely displays of speed, but part of a competitive process that determines access to mating opportunities. Despite the intensity of these interactions, they remain largely non-lethal, governed by the same balance between assertion and avoidance that characterizes territorial life outside the breeding period. Females maintain more consistent territories, particularly when raising young. The area surrounding a nest becomes a focal point of activity, and defensive behavior may intensify to protect offspring. While direct cooperation between females is limited, there are situations in which overlapping territories lead to a degree of tolerance, especially when resources are abundant. In such conditions, the cost of strict exclusion may outweigh the benefits, allowing individuals to coexist with reduced conflict. Among siblings, early life introduces the first experiences of social interaction. Within the nest, young squirrels share space, warmth, and access to nourishment. These initial interactions are not structured by competition in the same way as adult encounters, but they lay the foundation for later behavior. As the juveniles grow and begin to explore beyond the nest, their relationships shift from shared dependence to gradual separation. Competition for food and space increases, and the bonds formed in early life give way to the necessity of independence. Recognition plays a key role in maintaining the balance of these interactions. The ability to distinguish between familiar neighbors and unknown individuals allows squirrels to allocate their responses appropriately, conserving energy and avoiding unnecessary conflict. This form of social awareness suggests a level of cognitive complexity that supports life within a densely occupied and ever-changing environment. It is not a society built on cooperation in the human sense, but one defined by negotiated boundaries and adaptive responses. The spatial arrangement of territories also reflects the distribution of resources within the forest. Areas with abundant food may support higher densities of individuals, leading to more frequent interactions and a greater need for tolerance. In contrast, regions where resources are scarce may see larger territories and reduced overlap, as individuals range more widely to meet their needs. These patterns are not static but shift over time, influenced by seasonal changes and long-term ecological cycles. In this network of overlapping lives, the Eurasian red squirrel demonstrates a form of social existence that is both subtle and dynamic. It is an animal that balances independence with awareness of others, navigating a world where every branch may be shared in time, if not in ownership. Through signals, memory, and learned responses, it maintains a presence within a community that is defined not by constant interaction, but by the quiet negotiation of space and survival. Part 7. Rivals. Beyond the immediate demands of survival, the Eurasian red squirrel exists within a broader web of relationships that extend across species, shaping both its challenges and its opportunities. Among its most significant rivals is not a native inhabitant of its ancient forests, but a relative introduced from another continent. The presence of the grey squirrel has altered the balance in many parts of Europe, introducing a competitor that shares similar dietary needs, yet differs in key physiological and ecological traits. Larger in size and often more efficient at digesting certain types of food, the grey squirrel can outcompete the red squirrel in habitats where broadleaf trees dominate. In addition, it carries a viral disease to which it shows resistance, but which can be fatal to the Eurasian red squirrel, further intensifying the pressure on native populations. This competition is not uniform across all environments. In conifer-dominated forests, where the structure of cones favors the feeding techniques of the red squirrel, the native species can retain an advantage. The shape and density of these cones require a level of dexterity and speed that the grey squirrel does not match as effectively, allowing the Eurasian red squirrel to persist where conditions align with its specialized skills. Thus, the outcome of this rivalry is closely tied to habitat, with different forest types favoring one species over the other. The role of predators introduces an additional layer to this interaction. The pine marten, already a formidable hunter of squirrels, has been observed to disproportionately affect grey squirrel populations in certain regions. This dynamic creates a complex ecological balance in which the presence of a predator can indirectly support the survival of the native species by limiting the abundance of its competitor. Such relationships illustrate the interconnected nature of the forest ecosystem, where the actions of one species can ripple outward to influence many others. Beyond direct competition, the Eurasian red squirrel engages in a range of interactions with other animals that share its habitat. Birds often benefit from its feeding activities, particularly when cones are stripped and fragments fall to the forest floor. These remains provide accessible food for ground-feeding species, linking the squirrel's behavior to the foraging patterns of birds and small mammals. In turn, the presence of birds can offer indirect advantages, as their alarm calls may signal the approach of predators, providing an early warning that the squirrel can interpret and act upon. Fungi form another important connection within this network. By consuming mushrooms and dispersing their spores, the squirrel contributes to the maintenance of underground fungal systems that support tree health. These mycorrhizal networks facilitate the exchange of nutrients between trees and soil, enhancing the resilience of the forest. The squirrel's role in this process is not intentional, yet it is essential, demonstrating how individual feeding choices can have far-reaching ecological consequences. Interactions also occur through less visible means, such as the use of abandoned structures. Nests that are no longer occupied may be taken over by birds or other small animals, extending the utility of these constructions beyond their original purpose. Similarly, the remains of food caches, whether consumed or forgotten, become part of a shared resource pool within the ecosystem, available to any species capable of locating them. Competition is not limited to other squirrels. Various small mammals, including rodents, may exploit similar food sources, particularly seeds and nuts stored within the forest floor. This overlap can lead to indirect competition, as the availability of resources fluctuates. The strategy of scatter hoarding, with its many dispersed caches, reduces the risk of losing all stored food to such competitors, illustrating, once again, the adaptive value of this behavior. Even in the absence of direct conflict, the presence of other species influences the behavior of the Eurasian red squirrel. The constant need to remain aware of potential competitors and opportunistic thieves shapes how and where food is stored, how long an individual remains in one location, and how it responds to observation. The forest is not a static environment, but a dynamic space where each action is taken within the context of many others. Through these varied relationships, the Eurasian red squirrel is woven into a complex ecological fabric. It is at once a competitor, a prey species, a disperser of seeds and fungi, and a participant in countless indirect exchanges. Its interactions extend beyond its own kind, linking it to the broader processes that define the forest. In this intricate system, survival is not determined solely by individual ability, but by the shifting balance of relationships that connect all inhabitants of the woodland. Part 8. Human History. The relationship between the Eurasian red squirrel and humans extends far beyond the present, reaching into a past where forests were both livelihood and mystery. In many parts of Europe and Asia, the squirrel was a familiar presence, its movements observed among branches long before written records attempted to describe it. Its fur, soft and variable in color, became one of the earliest points of contact between humans and the species. In colder regions, squirrel pelts were used for clothing and trade, valued for their insulating qualities and relative abundance. Over time, this use became structured into local economies, with hunting regulated by season and necessity, linking the rhythms of human life to those of the forest. In medieval Europe, the squirrel held a place not only in daily life, but also in symbolism. It appeared in manuscripts and carvings, often representing traits associated with its behavior. Its habit of gathering and storing food led to associations with foresight and preparation, while its restless movement through branches sometimes symbolized energy or distraction. These interpretations reflected an attempt to understand the natural world through familiar patterns, assigning meaning to actions that were, in reality, shaped by survival rather than intention. Long before written records described the forests in detail, the movements of small creatures among the branches had already entered human imagination. In Norse mythology, a squirrel known as Ratatoska is said to run along the vast trunk of Yggdrasil, carrying messages between the eagle that watches from its highest branches and the serpent Nidhogg below. These messages are not neutral, but often sharpened into provocation, sustaining a quiet tension between distant parts of the world. In this image, the squirrel becomes more than a forest animal. It is a symbol of movement, connection, and the unseen exchanges that link separate realms, reflecting how even the smallest creature can occupy a place within a much larger order. In rural landscapes, the Eurasian red squirrel was often seen as both a neutral and beneficial presence. By dispersing seeds and contributing to forest regeneration, it played a quiet role in maintaining the resources upon which human communities depended. Yet this relationship was not always harmonious. In certain contexts, squirrels could be viewed as competitors. particularly when they fed on crops or stored food in ways that intersected with human use of the land. Such conflicts, though generally limited, reflect the broader reality of coexistence between human activity and wildlife. With the expansion of urban environments and the transformation of natural habitats, the context of this relationship has shifted. The squirrel has demonstrated a capacity to persist within parks, gardens, and fragmented woodlands, bringing it into closer proximity with human populations. In these settings, it often becomes a subject of observation and appreciation, its presence offering a connection to the rhythms of the natural world within altered landscapes. Feeding by humans, whether intentional or incidental, introduces new dynamics, supplementing natural diets, while also altering behavior in subtle ways. At the same time, human influence has introduced challenges that extend beyond direct interaction. The movement of species across continents, driven by human activity, has led to the introduction of competitors such as the grey squirrel, altering ecological balances in ways that were not anticipated. Habitat fragmentation, changes in forest composition, and the pressures of development have further reshaped the environments in which the Eurasian red squirrel lives. These changes are not isolated but cumulative, influencing the availability of resources, the structure of habitats, and the interactions between species. Cultural perception of the squirrel has also evolved, reflecting changing attitudes toward wildlife. In many regions, it is now regarded as a symbol of native biodiversity, its presence valued as part of a broader effort to preserve natural heritage. Conservation initiatives often focus on protecting habitats, managing competing species, and raising awareness of the ecological role played by the red squirrel. These efforts represent a shift from earlier utilitarian relationships toward a perspective that recognizes the intrinsic value of the species within its ecosystem. Despite these changes, the fundamental connection between humans and the Eurasian red squirrel remains rooted in shared space. Forests, whether expansive or fragmented, continue to serve as the meeting ground for this relationship. The squirrel moves through branches shaped by natural growth and human influence alike, adapting to conditions that are both ancient and newly formed. Its presence in these landscapes serves as a reminder of continuity, linking past and present through a species that has persisted alongside human societies for generations. In observing the Eurasian red squirrel, humans encounter not only an individual animal, but a reflection of the environments they have shaped and the histories they have inherited. The relationship is neither entirely harmonious nor entirely conflicting, but a complex interplay of use, perception, and adaptation. Through this ongoing interaction, the squirrel remains both a participant in human-altered ecosystems and a symbol of the enduring connections between people and the natural world. Part 9. Conservation. The continued presence of the Eurasian red squirrel within its vast range reflects both resilience and vulnerability, shaped by forces that extend beyond the boundaries of any single forest. Conservation of the species is not defined by a single challenge, but by the interaction of multiple pressures that vary across regions and over time. In some areas, populations remain stable, supported by extensive conifer forests and balanced ecological relationships. In others, declines have been observed, driven by competition, habitat change, and the cumulative effects of human influence. One of the most significant factors affecting the species in parts of Europe is the spread of the grey squirrel, an introduced relative whose presence alters the availability of resources and introduces disease. Where this species becomes established, the Eurasian red squirrel often experiences a rapid reduction in numbers, particularly in habitats dominated by broadleaf trees. The impact is not solely a matter of competition for food, but also the transmission of a viral disease to which the native species has little resistance. This combination creates conditions in which recovery becomes difficult without intervention. Habitat plays a central role in determining the outcome of these pressures. Coniferous forests, with their dense structure and specialized food sources, provide a refuge where the Eurasian red squirrel can maintain an advantage. In such environments, conservation efforts often focus on preserving and restoring these habitats, ensuring that the structural and ecological conditions necessary for the species are maintained. The continuity of forest cover is equally important, as fragmentation can isolate populations, reduce genetic exchange, and increase vulnerability to local decline. The role of predators introduces an element of natural regulation that can influence conservation outcomes in unexpected ways. In regions where the pine marten has recovered, its presence has been associated with a reduction in grey squirrel populations, indirectly benefiting the native species. This relationship highlights the importance of considering entire ecosystems rather than focusing on individual species in isolation. The restoration of natural balances, where possible, can support conservation goals in ways that align with long-established ecological processes. Human activity continues to shape the future of the Eurasian red squirrel in both direct and indirect ways. Forestry practices influence the composition and age structure of woodlands, affecting the availability of food and nesting sites. Urban expansion alters landscapes, creating new habitats while also introducing barriers and risks. Roads, for example, can fragment territories and increase mortality, while changes in land use may reduce the continuity of canopy cover that the species relies upon for safe movement. Conservation strategies reflect an increasing understanding of these complexities. In some regions, active management includes the control of grey squirrel populations, the protection of key habitats, and the establishment of wildlife corridors that connect fragmented forests. Public awareness also plays a role, as recognition of the species encourages support for measures that protect it. Monitoring programs track population trends, providing data that inform decisions and allow for the adjustment of strategies over time. Despite these efforts, the future of the Eurasian red squirrel remains closely tied to broader environmental changes. Climate patterns influence the productivity of forests, affecting the availability of seeds and the timing of seasonal events. Shifts in temperature and precipitation can alter the distribution of tree species, with cascading effects on the animals that depend on them. The squirrel, adaptable as it is, must navigate these changes within the limits of its ecological requirements. Yet within this uncertainty lies a measure of continuity. The behaviors that have sustained the species for generations, its ability to store food, to adapt its diet, to navigate complex environments, and to respond to shifting conditions, remain central to its survival. These traits, refined over long periods of evolutionary history, provide a foundation upon which the species can persist, even as the landscapes it inhabits continue to change. The conservation of the Eurasian red squirrel is therefore not only a matter of preserving a single species, but of maintaining the integrity of the forests that support it. It is an effort that recognizes the interconnectedness of life within these ecosystems, where the fate of one organism is linked to many others. In protecting the conditions that allow the squirrel to thrive, there is also a preservation of the processes that sustain the forest itself. As the seasons continue to turn and the cycles of growth and renewal unfold, the Eurasian red squirrel remains a quiet presence among the branches. Its movements, shaped by instinct and experience, carry forward a lineage that has endured through changing climates and shifting landscapes. The future it faces will depend on the balance achieved between natural resilience and human stewardship, a balance that will determine whether this enduring inhabitant of the forest continues to move through its canopy for generations to come. The end.